Yeah, it's preparing to live stream.
Okay.
The participants are going to enter this very same Zoom link, right? In a few minutes.
I think we can already allow them in.
Yeah, we are live on YouTube. So I will also start the webinar. Well, good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the webinar. Welcome to the Transitions in the Global South webinar series. I see many people joining in, so I'll give it maybe 30 seconds for more people to join in, while I also share screen where you can see the poster for today's webinar. Well, today is actually it's a STRN webinar day because right after our webinar, which is starting now, we also have the webinar of the geography of sustainability transitions. And I see Bernard Truffer in there in the attendee list. So I see a couple of people also joining in from that group. Thank you. So yeah, it's actually a double webinar day. I hope all of you can join for both webinars. So our webinar will, I'll quickly check. Yeah, so yeah, so today our webinar, the topic of our webinar is actually informality, informal economy in terms of pandemic. So we have 3 speakers. So for those of you who have joined our webinars before, so this is actually the 6th webinar of the series. You know that we always have speakers who are either working and also from the Global South. So we have 3 speakers today who will be specifically discussing informality, researching, who are actually researching informality in the context of Kenya, Indonesia, and Brazil. But before we actually go into the presentations, for those of you who are joining in maybe for the first time and wanting to know who we are, I thought we will just introduce ourselves first. So we are a group. We are a group of international transition scholars, which was a group which was formed in the International Sustainability Transitions Conference in 2015, 5 years ago now in Brighton. So ever since, it has become a kind of a thematic group within the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, which is STRN. So you will see the kind of a description of our network in that link, which is as a thematic group of STRN. Our focus is obviously, as part of STRN, our focus is on socio-technical transitions, specifically transition dynamics towards sustainability. But our geographical or maybe empirical focuses are primarily on Asia, Africa, and Latin America, but also elsewhere in geographically, but also contextually, what we say contextual Global South, where you deal with issues around Global South issues, for instance. So as a group, our main activities has been mostly running webinars. So this is a webinar series that we are running this year, but in previous years, we have also run webinars when there was no pandemic, but we still ran webinars. And we do host debate as a group in different conferences, and specifically definitely in the IST conferences. And we also have had tracks, like specific research tracks in IST conferences before. So these are our kind of activities. But in terms of our kind of web presence, you can always reach us in our official email address, which is transitions.globalsouth@gmail.com. But as our first kind of entry point into being a community was the mailing list, which was the Google group, which is now has almost 300 members. But our Twitter community is even bigger. It's now almost 600 followers. And you can still follow, if you don't follow us yet, you can follow us in Transition South. And I also wanted to share a very good news that our Global South Transitions YouTube channel has just crossed 100 subscribers. So we received this very nice congratulatory email from the YouTube team just 5 days ago, saying that we have passed 100 subscribers. So thank you also for subscribing to our YouTube channel. So as a group, as you can see, we are a completely voluntary, completely self-organized and self-funded group. And our entire effort is reliant on enthusiasm from many people who are part of the panel today, and many people who are not part of the panel today, but we also have a kind of a core Slack community where we interact in Slack to organize this webinar. So I must say that the organization of this webinar has, so there are more people behind the screens of organizing this webinar series. I may not be visible in this panel list. So yes, it's entirely reliant on, yes, I want to help. So if you want to help in organizing similar webinar series or do something else in 2021 and take on board the platform of Transitions in the Global South, please feel free to write us in Twitter or just email us in our email address. So I forgot to also introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am a postdoctoral research scholar, research fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit, SPRU, in University of Sussex in the UK. I finished my PhD a couple of years ago, so I'm a postdoctoral fellow now who is working on these projects called Deep Transitions and Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium, TIPSI. So those are my projects, but my research interest based on my PhD research has always been looking into urban mobility transitions, specifically in the context of India and Thailand. That was my PhD. So with that note, I will actually hand over to Rafael, who is a co-organizer of today's webinar, but also the overall webinar series, who will also present what we did for the last 5 months in this series. Rafael?
Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good night, whatever you're watching us from. And thank you for attending us to our webinar. This is the 6th webinar of this series we organized this year based on COVID-19 and transitions in the Global South. We had one webinar each month since June, and we covered a lot of different subjects we have here on this table. And also we have a final webinar on December. We would like to invite all of you, and please kindly ask you to save the date. It will be on our second STRN webinar day, also in a joint initiative with Geographic Transitions that will be in the next webinar. And we will talk about the role of the states and also a general debate about everything we have learned from these initiatives. I'm based in Brazil, in Curitiba. I'm a PhD student from Universidade Positivo in southern Brazil and working on food systems transitions. And hope you all have a great event today. I'll give the floor to Joanna, who is going to host this session and to present our panelists and conduct the discussion.
Thank you, Rafael. It's such an honor to host as a guest for this webinar series. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be Fasi and Rafael and the whole Global South transition in the Global South community for this opportunity. So I'm Joanna. I'm a PhD candidate in Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development in Utrecht University. My research focus on platform economy and societal transitions. And I'm very happy to host today's webinar because it's such an interesting topic that we're going to discuss today, which is about informality during the COVID-19 crisis. Well, if you look at the report from ILO, the International Labour Organizations, in 2020, over 2 billion workers are actually earning their livelihood in the informal economy. And this is 62% of all workers. So it means that the numbers of informal workers are bigger than the formal workers. And in those numbers, in those figures, women are more exposed to informality in low and lower middle income countries and often in more vulnerable situations than their male counterparts. So many women and men in the informal economy need to earn an income to feed themselves and their family, as most of them cannot rely on income replacement or saving. And we could understand during this time of pandemic, not working or staying at home means losing their job and their livelihoods. There's a popular sentence to describe this kind of livelihood: to die from hunger or from the virus. This is actually a real dilemma faced by many informal economy workers. So today, the idea is to dive into livelihood of informal actors, informal workers during the time of COVID-19. And I'm very happy that now we have three interesting speakers who are going to discuss a lot this livelihood of informal workers and also informal world. Our first speaker will be George Kiambuti Wainaina. He's a doctorate candidate both in Utrecht University and also in Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Aquatic Science. And our second, George will present a lot about informal settlements, the life of informal settlements in Kenya, based experience in Kenya. And then our second speaker is Dr. Ana Carolina de Aguirre Rodriguez. Is that correct? Sorry about my bad pronunciation. She is a professor at the School of Economic Administration and Accounting at University of Sao Paulo. And she will present about the life of migrants worker and also the spectrum of migrants worker in informal economy, mostly based from a Brazilian experience. And our third speaker is Dr. Amalinda Safirani. She is an associate professor and head of department at Department of Politics and Government, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. And she will also present livelihood of informal worker, specifically from female perspective. So we have such interesting presentations today from three different continents: Asia, Africa, and and Latin America. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, George. You may share your screen of presentations, and you have 15 to 20 minutes to present your paper and your idea.
Sure, thank you very much, Joanna. Just a moment, I'm sharing my screen right away. So just to be sure, I hope you can see my screen.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. My name is George Wainaina. And I have a lot of interest in informal settlements, and this is my area of research in terms of basic service provision within informal settlements and also informal settlement upgrading. I plan to use my 20 minutes to present a bit of a transitions perspectives towards informal settlements, and I'm going to concentrate on the impacts of COVID-19 measures on informal settlement in Kenya. So my presentation is comprised of 5 sections. First, I want to introduce how a transitions lens can be used to understand informal settlements. Then I want to present a concept that we are trying to develop at the moment on how we can have typologies of activities that are conducted within the informal settlements and how they couple with each other. Then I'm going to elaborate the couplings, then look at the measures that were taken in Kenya and the disruptions that these measures presented in Kenya in terms of COVID and in terms of informal settlement. So to start with, we know informal settlements as very complex grounds because a lot of things happen at the same time. There's a lot of lack of space, lack of basic infrastructure, and a lot of productive activities going on at different times and in different places. And sometimes this is understood as if it is lack of order. And the idea for us is to try to look for order within this complex system of things happening at the same time. So in socio-technical or in transition studies, ideally, we tried to look at regimes, and I really tried to simplify these as much as I could so that those non-technical people who are attending could also probably get to what I'm trying to speak about. So regimes, we are going to talk about them a lot, and they are semi-coherent rules that coordinate activities within a given socio-technical system. So an informal settlement is actually a socio-technical system which is comprised of technologies, activities, actors, and rules. And therefore, we identify 3 types of regime within socio-technical systems. And if you look at an informal settlement, you have reproduction activities that happen there. These reproduction activities are activities such as going to school, taking care of children, washing, dumping, fetching water, and such. So these activities usually have their rules in terms of when they are done, who does them, where they are done, and the spaces in which they are done in. So we refer to this as the reproduction regime to show all the activities that are involved in reproduction and the rules that revolve around them so that they are reproduced every day within the informal settlements in a routinized manner. Then a second regime that we identify in this sort of concept is the production regime. For instance, you can see there's a woman right on the photo who is basically selling her wares on a footpath. And this in a normal in a situation that is in a planned place, you would not really find this happening because then it would be interpreted as breaking the rules. But within the informal settlements, as we are going to see later, rules are very flexible. And in this case, the production is taking place, that is the selling of her wares is taking place there because this is something which is acceptable as a norm in that place. So production really, in our understanding, includes all the activities and the rules that involve value creation. And in this case, they could be activities such as operating very small businesses like these women you can see here, or alternatively going to work in a nearby industry, because mostly informal settlements are located very near industries of walking distances so that people can go to work there at given times of the day and then come back in the evening. So there are rules around production activities and there are rules around reproduction activities. And these 2 regimes are socio-economic in nature. Then we have a third regime, and I would want to stress that this that regime is a socio-technical regime. It is socio-technical in nature and involves infrastructure and how it is used by the people. If you look, for instance, at the photo in itself, you see there's a road and there's a footpath which are being used for multiple purposes. On a normal day, you would expect that these would be the spaces for driving or mobility only, but in this case, they are also used for other things. And this is the sort of the systems that you will find, complex systems that you'll find in informal settlements where things are used for multiple purposes. So with this in mind, at the back of our mind, I would like to go on and try and explain further the typologies that you will probably find in informal settlements. So in the production regime, you'll find activities like working in nearby industries. And this is usually controlled by strict scheduled rules of operation within the nearby industries. For example, in some industries, you have them going to work in the morning around 8 in the evening, and they leave at around 5. The contracts are usually quite unstable and very precarious. And this is quite common in a lot of informal settlements that you will see. And these industries control a lot of the rhythms of the livelihood of the informal dwellers. Because if around 80% are working in these casual jobs, then it means that when they're going to work, there are specific times when they'll be going to work, there are specific times they'll be coming back. Maybe to elaborate on another aspect of an activity that happens within the settlement is in the small businesses. For instance, hawkers who sell small wares, or even small hotels or barber shops within the informal settlements. You find that most of these activities in the small businesses happen in the evenings. And mostly this couples with the working in the industry, such that when people come out in the evening, that's the time they have now to go and open small businesses, or actually those who own small businesses open at that time because they know that is the time that most people will be passing by. And this is a sort of a norm that controls this activity and reproduces it. So we have a lot of other activities, for example, like renting shacks, which have their own rules, and also illegal businesses, which have their own rules that are done in secretive ways, in specific locations, and at specific times, and are basically coping oriented. Then we have reproduction regimes. I could give just a bit of examples. And here we have two main groups. We have those activities that are congregative in nature. For example, leisuring or worshiping or even table banking. And these are common activities within informal settlements. And they have their own rules. They are done mostly when production activities are not taking place. So that will be in the evening or in the weekends. Then they are done in specific spaces which are constructed for that specific purpose. Then they follow the rhythms of the nearby industries also. And membership in these congregative activities is usually based on ethnicity, gender, age, or even place of work. Then we have other activities such as household activities, which are more at a personal level or at a household level. These include things like washing, feeding, sheltering, defecating, dumping, paying, and they all have their own rules within the settlement. And for the interest in time, I would not want to dwell much deeper into that. But the good thing to understand here is that these are activities and they have their own rules. When we come to infrastructure regime, then you find that this is now here we talk about the infrastructure and the technologies and the rules that work around them. So you have road spaces, and as I showed you in the previous photo, they are considered as basically open spaces, and this is a norm within the informal settlement. They are used for multiple functions at different times of the day. For instance, in the evenings, you'll find a lot of small traders who come with their wares and just place them on the road, as you saw with that woman. This is a use of space which is unconventional, as you would expect it. Then you have other technologies or infrastructure that is involved with water provision. Here we are talking about the household level. You have infrastructure for solid waste management, and you have infrastructure for things like storm water. And where these do not exist, then there are no definite rules for how, for example, you dump waste, and usually you take a coping approach. As long as the waste is not within your compound, you're okay. And these are norms which are known by all dwellers. And if you go there as a new person, then you find as if everything is not ordered in any way, but there is always some sort of an order in all the different way. Now, these three regimes couple. They couple within the context of informal settlements, such that you have the spaces being used for the different regimes, you have the times for the regimes coinciding or overlapping, and you have actors being the same within the three regimes. And this sort of coupling is what now makes up a given socio-technical system that in this case of ours, it is the informal settlement socio-technical system. Well, there are other systems that make up the larger urban socio-technical system. And another example I could give would be, for example, a gated community, which would still have its production, consumption, and reproduction. And that gated community would still interact with an informal settlement because you will still have maybe people from informal settlements working in those gated communities. So there are a lot of interactions within these systems, but in this case, we are concentrating on the informal settlement subsystem. Now, looping back to our main objective, since now we understand the perspective that I'm looking informal settlements from, I want to try and explain what happens when an external shock like COVID-19 disrupts the three regimes that we have talked about. So to start with, I'll give you the measures that Kenya put in to ensure that the spread within the country was reduced. And I'm going to concentrate on those measures that really touched the informal settlements. Of course, this list is not exhaustive and there are much more. Within the reproduction realm, you had curfews and travel restrictions. All congregative places were closed down. Social distancing was implemented, 1.5 meters. Then listing in the Credit Reference Bureau was suspended for quite a period. I think it was, the suspension was stopped just maybe a month ago. Then people had to wear masks whenever they went outside of their houses. There were 60% occupancy in public vehicles while traveling, and home care for asymptomatic patients was delegated to homes, and the care was delegated to homes, and they were not admitted in hospitals. In the infrastructure realm, we had prioritization of garbage collection and cleanliness, and provision of clean water, especially in most highly congregated places like markets. Then there was also regular disinfection and hygiene, and these were mostly especially in markets and where possible within the informal settlements directly. Then in the production realm, corporations and businesses were encouraged to let people work from home. But as we are going to see, this really wasn't so good for the informal settlement, but we'll see that. Then the minimum workforce was recommended for all industries that are there. So in actual sense, if you have an industry that has 50 people and the work can be done maybe by 20 people, then you reduce your workforce or you organize them in shifts. And this, of course, affected production because people from informal settlements worked in these industries. So there were other interventions which were not rule-oriented, and some of them were things like partnerships, where there was a lot of money that was mobilized to bring in this infrastructure. Then there were programs to try and employ youths. For example, there's one famous one called Kazi Mtaani. Then there were also cash transfers to vulnerable people within the settlement. So these were approved, and from a lot of news articles, I looked at around 100 news articles that I could find online of what was happening from the time of COVID was reported in Kenya to now. you could see that there are reports that in some cases the money was distributed, yes, and the people got them and they are appreciating about that. So of course, there was also a lot of awareness campaigns, and there was a lot of frugal engineering and innovation that was taking place. People were making their own masks in informal settlements and even selling them. People were making hand washing points in informal settlements, and just to self-mobilize and take care of themselves. Even mobilization for welfare packages from within and outside informal settlements was also very common in Kenya. Then now we look at the disruptions that were caused by these rules. On the green side, we are looking at the initial regime, the initial production regime that I earlier talked about. And this is working nearby industries and operating small businesses. The measures that were really influential on these were the changed working times, the working from home, and the Kazi Mtaani project, which was more to employ the youth. And the writings in red are actually the negative sort of impacts that these measures had. What is in black is more of neutral because it's probably something which was done but not sustainable. And what is in green is something which was actually positive due to these measures. So first thing was loss of employment and reduced incomes because industries really closed down. And the kind of work that informal settlement dwellers do is not work that you can go and do at home. And then the kind of contracts that they have do not allow them to sue anybody for being fired instantly. So this was a very negative thing that actually happened. There was quite noticeable urban rural migration when people could no longer afford anything within the settlements. And also the temporary jobs that were created by programs like Kazi Mtaani, the payments were delayed because of government procedures in some places. Businesses within the informal settlements now also started closing down early because of the curfew. And all of a sudden, the supply chains were disrupted. So you don't have supplies, and then the businesses are closing down early. So that definitely resulted to reduced incomes. Then, in a good note, there were alternative businesses coming up. For instance, as I said, making masks within the settlement and selling them within there. So this is a productive activity that worked. But of course, then now it had to be restricted with other rules of the standards of the mass and so on and so forth. Then there were some sort of commensalistic relations that remained, but it was not the same. In this case, I'm talking about small businesses congregating around bigger businesses. And this is common in informal settlements, but it was not now so good to do it because people were even afraid of going out sometimes. Then due to these, other illegal coping businesses and businesses like renting shacks were really impacted because of the lower incomes that are being experienced in the settlements. And because of this, there were a lot of evictions within that. And this probably also circles back now to urban rural migration. And illegal activities were also exacerbated, and sometimes even violence was observed within the informal settlements. Then in the reproduction realm, as I almost complete, then we had the wearing of masks. The sort of impacts that came due to these were more borrowing, because remember now when you tell people that you're not going to be registered in the Credit Reference Bureau, then they just continue borrowing because they also needed the money. And then new practices came up that were not so easy to take up, and they were being enforced in a very violent manner in some instances. So maybe wearing masks, social distancing, and such, and costs were also restricted because some people couldn't just afford the masks. Of course, there were new income streams, though they were low, but this came from the government contributions. There were increased commuting expenses, gender-based violence cases increased, and home care increased the responsibilities of the women. And the congregative activities, of course, they were closed down. So people started having illegal gatherings, and sometimes they were ill-intended, and then the police would come and search. And of course, there are more impacts in terms of there was more solidarity within the settlements because help came in line of ethnic alignment or grouping alignment, depending on which group you belong to, or even ages, depending on that. So people aligned more within that those lines. In the infrastructure realm, this is where we had a lot of hand washing, sanitation and sanitizing units and solid waste management activities. And these were neutral because while the water supply was boosted, the utilities were told not to cut down the supplies, but nobody was paying the monthly fees. And now this resulted to the water utilities being really strained. Although there are some ways that the government was trying to handle this, but it was really a challenge. And eventually, the sustainability of such water points is quite questionable. Then there were increased, of course, frequencies of hand washing, and this of course led to now diminishing of the water that was available. Then the cleanliness of the settlements also improved, but we wouldn't say that it was really as you would expect an extremely clean place to be, but in a way it improved. Well, the dwellers exhibited key resources within the informal settlements, and among them was high flexibility and quick adaptability in terms of trying to make their own solutions for the problems that are coming by. They are also efficient in terms of how they use resources and how they interact with each other. They have very compact relations, and they are characterized by trust in a common group, for example, same ethnicity, mutual mistrust in intergroups. Two different ethnicities often don't trust each other. And also, generally, all the dwellers don't really trust the government. So these kind of relations exists over long periods of time, and it controlled a lot of things that happened within the COVID situation. Then these relations were also very useful for contact tracing, because then if you get a case from a given place, you knew how to follow around and try to sort of know who could have contacted who and how. So the way they resolve also their conflicts is quite interesting because it's mediative, accommodative, and it involves a lot of negotiation as opposed to the government, which is very adjudicative in its enforcement. Well, these are snippets showing a lot of problems that happened in informal settlements from a lot of sources that I could get. And the idea was to show that a lot of them were negative and they were productive oriented, and that production really controlled a lot of the activities within the informal settlements and their rhythms. Well, as we speak right now, we have a total of 1039 deaths in Kenya, 37,000 recovered. So probably from the objective of the measures, maybe this worked as measures, but I wouldn't really conclusively say that it is the measures. But the question that I would probably pose is, how do we design measures to protect public health that are aligned to the local context and minimize unintended consequences in the socio-technical system? Because we have seen a lot of unintended impacts due to the measures and not even due to the COVID itself in terms of death. So how exactly can we design now better policies that can control the spread, but still be in line with the context that we are in? And this is a question that probably we could discuss after this. With that, I'm really thankful for your time and concentration, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, George, for your very insightful presentations about the Kenyan context, especially in terms of the informal settlements during COVID-19. I think you gave quite clear pictures on how complex and also integrated actually the livelihood of informal dwellers in these informal settlements between three regimes you mentioned: the productions, reproductions, and infrastructures. Now we are trying to see whether we have questions to George. We have, yes, we have two questions here first
Okay.
from Ignacio about is it possible to measure quantitatively the impact of COVID on the informal economy and its size? I think this is a very good question, and I think personally, I would like to give these questions to all of the three speakers because this is a quite general questions. So if you are okay, Ignacio, we will try to hold your questions, and we will discuss your questions later on after all of our three speakers presented. If it's okay with you, and maybe George, you could answer the questions from Monica Ramos Mejia. Thank you, George, for your presentation. I was wondering if you also observe new values that may disrupt the regime you were talking about.
Just a moment, let me just stop sharing so that I can also read the questions. I'm sorry.
Or maybe we could invite Monica Ramos to ask personally your questions. Hi, Monica.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, yes. Please give your questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, George, for your presentation. It's very interesting. I was wondering if you've also observed new values, because you talk about practices that may disrupt these regimes, but so I was wondering about values, like new values based on, for example, solidarity, or I don't know. So that was my question.
Okay, maybe what happened mostly is that people are really brought together by the COVID because it was an external influence which was affecting everybody within the settlement, despite the sort of norms that they have. So they were really brought together. So in terms of solidarity, I would say it was actually in sort of a way improved, but within the groups themselves, not necessarily intergroup. But in terms of other values that are new, I'm not really sure that anything was really changed that much.
Okay, Monica, do you have further questions to George?
No, I think it's interesting, just to explore that a bit further, because it seems like if these small innovations are more related to survival, but in terms of disrupting, it would be interesting if the like new or potential new regime works based on new values, like more like values closer to sustainability. So that's it. That was just my curiosity about it.
Okay, thank you so much, Monica. I think that is something we could think about later on how do we see this the pandemic whether it brings any new practices or new values on these informal communities. And do we have other questions? Yes, from Adriana. Maybe we can invite Adriana to follow up the questions from Monica. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
I'm here. Hello, George. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting to see this idea of regimes applied to the informal settlement. And just complementing the very interesting question about Monica, about the transformation of rules and values and rules and its impact on the rules of the regime in the informal settlement. How do you see the role of technology development and the diffusion of new technologies, or not so really new, like mobile applications, mobile apps? How do they affect this existing regime in the informal settlements?
Well, mostly technology enables, for example, reproductive activities. For example, I'll give a good example with M-Pesa in Kenya. It really revolutionizes how people transfer money. For instance, during the COVID period, this government government, the government was giving some money to the families directly through M-Pesa in some instances, and some tariffs were reduced in M-Pesa, making borrowing even from mobile applications much cheaper. But then it also had a downturn because it pushed people into much more debt. So it has both positive and negative aspects, mostly within the informal settlements. And I think it also needs some sort of regulation in terms of how these technologies are introduced and how they even spread within the informal settlement.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we already have 10 minutes. Thank you so much, George, for presenting your idea and also answering the questions. We will follow up with the general discussion later on. And before we continue to our second speaker, I would like to announce a small pulse that we will try to pop up in your screens. We would like to know where are you joining from today, to see like where are you from today in joining our webinar. It's just one question, so it will only take 5 seconds for you to answer. And yes, and we don't have participants from United States yet, maybe because they're still busy of monitoring the polls. So yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, wow, we have many participants from Europe and also from Latin America, South and Southeast Asia. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining our polls. And now we can continue to our second speaker, Dr. Anna, who will present the dynamic and also life of migrant workers in Brazil. Yeah. So the time is yours, Dr. Anna.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all. For me, it's good morning, but I hope you had a nice day for those who are at night. Let me share also my screen. So we have talked a little bit before, and I told Joanna that I also study migrant workers. For this presentation, I'm not going to focus on necessarily them, but I'm going to try to show a little bit of the inequality that is probably the word that can better describe Brazil and the workplace in Brazil. So I'm a professor at the University of São Paulo, and I'm going to present some of the reflections and some discussions and work I've been doing with my research team at USP. And I would like also to thank them, all my students and researchers in my team. So I was telling you that one word that can describe Brazil is inequality, right? So we were colonized. Brazil was under a slavery process and system. We had a very difficult process from liberating and the slaves, and the way that Brazil dealt also with the natives. So we still deal with the consequences of the colonization. And when you talk about for me to talk about the processes of work and relations, I need to start showing a little bit of how is the Brazilian workforce today, so bring a little bit of context. Then I'm going to talk about the workplace bonds, which are the concepts I study most. Then I'm going to show a little bit of the research in progress and then reflections. Okay, here. So if you think of Brazil's population who are over 14 years old or over, we have 170 million people, right? So we should have, out of the workforce, 75 million people from those, and in the workforce, 95.6 million people. From those, I have some things here, right? Sorry. From those, we have 12.7 million unemployed people in Brazil nowadays. When you think of occupied people, there are 82.9 million. From those, 23.4 million are business owners, they can be registered or not, and 1.9 million people in family business. When you think of employees or self-employees, there are 57.6 million people. From those people, the maids and clean women make up for 5 million people. And then in the private sector, we have 40.3 million people. And from those, non-registered work are 9.2 million people. Registered labor, we have 31.1 million people. So you can see what's the registered labor in Brazil, right? Comparing to the whole thing. So when you put all the types of work contracts plus outsourcing, and from those, we have approximately 40.5 million union members. Thinking about the public sector, there are 12.3 million people. Civil servant and army workers that make up for 8.6 million people. So we have from those approximately 2 million union members. And it's a little bit embarrassing, but we have no registered labor in the public sector, from temporary workers and things like that, 2.5, and registered labor, 1.2 million people. So when you think of this, and my research team helped me with this, when we think of this, we have two big work realities during the pandemic: those who could work from home, those who could work away from home, and I didn't put here yet, but also those who couldn't work at all, right? So when you think of those people who could work and can work from home, they are dealing with home office, they are learning new technology, they are dealing with gender roles and conflicts and all the psychological issues, right, related to that. Those working outside home, they are dealing with fear of contagious and the contagious itself, and the safety, the availability of safety equipment. Of course, when you think of the ones with employment contract, they might have a little bit more of a structure, but sometimes they don't have. Depends on what's the deal with the organization and the contract with the organization. And those who are working away from home with the employment contract may experience relative unhealthiness or high unhealthiness. But of course, when we look at the ones without employment contracts, then we have those working home with a little bit of structure, even without employment contract, and we have most of them without structure. Some working away from home with relative safeness and with low safeness, and we have some not working at all, as I told you. So just to bring a little bit of an overview of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil. It's research, I think it was published in June, so it's a little bit outdated at this point after a couple of months. So 5.8 million people were away from their jobs due to the social distance guidelines. Of these, the largest proportion of leave is among the categories without a formal contract, mainly domestic workers and public sector employees. And the unemployment rate is 13.7%. 18.5 million people say they are not looking for work due to the pandemic or lack of work options in their locality. 30.9% of the employed portion had their wages reduced, and 44% of households received emergency assistance after a lot of social pressure for the government. We got that approved, and at this point, it's passing through changes. So the assistance is is lower now, but this is the reality we had for a few months. I'm not going to enter a lot under inside of concepts, but I'm going to bring 3 of the workplace bonds I've been studying with my research team. One of them is commitment. It's a kind of voluntary psychological bond that reflects dedication and responsibility for one focus in particular, which can be the organization, the work, the community, as we saw a lot during the pandemic, co-workers and etc. So the criteria for commitment is to be voluntary, to reflect dedication and attributed importance. When you think of the pandemic and you look at the range of the workers during the pandemic and all the different realities in Brazil, how much can they choose to work at home? Do they like the new format imposed by the context? Those are things that might impact on commitment. Entrenchment is the tendency of individuals to remain in the organization or in their work conditions when they are not inside of the organization due to possible losses associated with their living. So the criteria for someone to be entrenched is to have limited alternatives, financial necessity, and high adaptation level. So they adapted to that condition. It's not easy to just leave that. And then the questions for the pandemic, do they have other work options available? Are they dependent for one's immediate survival, right? The work is what makes the survival for that person at that moment. And consent is a tendency of individuals to obey the organization or the superiors in their work environment hierarchy. So it has to do with inner acceptance and obedience. So do they believe in the new rules of the organization during the pandemic? The guidelines, the safety guidelines, do they follow instructions regardless of how much they agree? And then I'm going to bring just a little bit of reflection on that. When you think of people working home from, and the green ones are the ones with the formal contract, right? They are employed and they can do that remotely. They have arrangements, they are coordinated by the organization to make a feasible routine at home. And you have those who don't have the work contract, so they are liberal artists, researchers. I want to highlight that without formal ties, we have those. And then when you think of the ones working from at home and with formal contract, inside of having an organization, they might have adaptation facilitated, still loss of social contact, less of a systemic view of the organization. And they might, their commitment and the concept might predict the adjust they will do for the work. And they might experience commitment conflicts. Of course, they are inside of home, sometimes with kids, children, family issues and everything that will compete for their attention, right? So this is a kind of, I'm trying to just bring a little bit of illustration for those. On the other hand, we have those with no institutional support, also with loss of social contact, more uncertainty, and many times they're still committed to work, right? They cannot, they are dealing with the pandemic, but without a work contract, but committed to their work. And it's not that all the workers without contract are necessarily in have low incomes, but this is the most part of Brazil, right? So this is one of the pictures that can show a little bit of our inequality. When you think of workers away from home, we have those with formal contracts in essential services, industry, banking, and the health professionals, and morticians, right? The ones which many times they are forgotten, but we want to highlight them too. And the ones working away from home without contract, courier, taxi driver, ride share drivers, doctor, dentists as legal entities, and non-frontline in this case. So for those who are in a formal contract, they sometimes they will have increased attention to the use of personal protective equipment, increasing tension of relationships at work because of all the pressure to be working at the workplace situation with the pandemic. Commitment depends on how necessary they perceive their condition, right? Do they really need to be out? Well, when you think of health professionals, many times, yes, they won't question that, but for other parts, it might be questioned. But one thing we see is the commitment to community when they see, well, it's an essential service and the community needs that, right? So here are some pictures, and those who are without the contract, they have little or no support for the personal protective equipment or guidelines, no support in case they fall sick, and a greater uncertainty. So we consider that they have a greater tendency towards entrenchment. And here are some pictures as well. So again, we can see a little bit of the inequality. And those who cannot work, the laborers, owners of shops, restaurants, maids, they had and have little or no financial support to face the period without working, unless they are legit to receive the support from the government, but still it's not enough. It's not the amount they would need to make. They are dealing with the interruption of work and all the psychological consequences of that, right? The loss of social contact, and sometimes, and many times, while committed, they experience frustration with the impacts and impossibility of continuing to work. So how's this part now is to think I'm not going to discuss a lot, but just bring a little bit of picture of how's the work technology transition happening in Brazil based on some preliminary results. So I have two students, they are here. One of them is a PhD candidate, Gisele. I'm not going to show her whole study. It's only one of her objectives in her study is to comprehend the work process in the gig economy, looking at app drivers. This is not the main objective, it's just a part of it, but she's thinking and comparing what's a formal work in a traditional organization and the role of the HR department and the HRM in so many processes like hiring and recruiting, training, developing, managing performance, payment, benefits, the turnover, and how it's all organized and structured for the worker. And when we look at the informal economy, actually it changes the active actor, the actor that really enables those practices is not necessarily the organization. Sometimes, yes, the organization is going to bring a kind of system that will enable customers to evaluate performance. So the organization brings the system, but the customers, they are the ones who evaluate. The payment is not directly based on the organization. Many times even the worker has to pay for the work itself when they need to buy or rent cars and equipment to work. The training and development is based on social support, YouTube videos and friends. So it's the idea of having an HRM practice and group of practice is very different. And she's studying, this is a part of her study, and this is only preliminary results. And also, when you think of here in Brazil, in other places too, but here in Brazil, we had this social network as a basis for strike a few months ago, right? So I have another student, she's a master candidate, Juliana Correa, and she's studying how the commitment and entrenchment of the app workers is happening and the dynamics of the bonds and whose work contexts are informal and precarious, right? So, sorry, the app workers that who have the context of informality and precarization. So she's actually at this point doing her data collection. She has interviewed some of them. She's looking for people who had as a previous work, precarious or non-precarious work. So not all the app delivery workers, they used to have a precarious work before. Some of them were hired and formal workers before. And now they are dealing with the changes, with the commitment they used to have, depending on the context, what is residual, which means they used to be committed to a work before, and now they are in an app, and they still have the memory, they still have the experience, the past experience, and its impact, of course, and how they feel. So when she started to look at some of the elements of the precarious context now, so she started to look at elements that are happening in the trajectories of these workers. So she sees from their speech and reports, loss of social and emotional support, loss of confidence, impediment to rest. I'm not going to read everything, but just to give an example, silency, loss of authenticity, loss of respect, invisibility. And it happens in a group of phases, right? It's not something that happens from one time to another, and then she's mapping the phases where in which it happens for them, and the impacts for the individual, suffering, anxiety, guilt for idleness, individualization, pressure, exhaustion, and everything. And the working class, fragmentation, lack of union representation, low income, absence of labor rights. So we're talking also about collective consequences. And of course, she's studying the consequences for the bonds, the commitment, entrenchment, and how it happens. Let me give you just one or two speeches from those workers during the pandemic. They said, work, we practically doubled deliveries. It's one after the other. If you count it, there's no time to even get on the bike. And another one said, so it was a mix of very big emotions and everything was very fast. And at the beginning, we didn't know what to do. If you stayed at home, if you would wear a mask, if you wouldn't wear a mask. If I was looking for gel alcohol, I didn't have one, my city is small. And another one, then in the pandemic, a lot of companies sent people away. Nobody was hiring. So it got very, very difficult. The app helped me a lot, but when I really needed it, I was not supported. It happened after having an accident at work. So what now, right? This is the last slide. What you can say is the most predictable assertion in this field is work models will continue to change, coupled with digital transformation. We are mapping in this research, in these studies, how the gig economy brings the myth of choice, and the perception of precariousness sometimes will be there, but many times it's not there for the workers. And think of the after pandemic, two concerns are, first, we are going through a social training, international social training to use in digital technology. But what about the digital periphery, right? We still have, for researchers like us, the use of Zoom for webinars and much more advanced technology for some organizations. And for the informal workers, what they get is to use the app and to be explored by the app. So we are talking about the digital periphery and what's going to happen as the distances continue to grow, right? So thank you very much. And I'm here available for questions.
Thank you so much for interesting presentations, Dr. Anna. I like the way you present about the spectrum of people who are work from home or work away from home, and those who cannot work during this time of pandemic, and how actually in those each of the category there is some kind of inequality also happens with some digital technology access and their livelihood. So I think before we start with questions, I am looking here at the chat. One of your students is presenting. One of your students is here as attendee, and if it's okay, we would like to give like 3 minutes to Giselle, perhaps to add a bit more about your research on informal economy, on informal workers and gig economy. Maybe we could unmute Giselle.
Or
Hi,
maybe,
Giselle.
maybe
Yeah.
if she wants to speak now, or if she wants to listen to some questions and then comment.
Okay, sure. So maybe
Yeah,
first, yeah. Okay.
She is part of the panel now. She should be able to unmute herself whenever she wants.
Okay, Giselle, do you want to add some points from your research? Or we can
Hi,
continue.
everyone.
Hi.
Yes, I can talk a little bit more about my research, but we can do as Anna says, we can listen some questions and I put some points, okay?
Okay. So maybe we could start with one person who are raising a hand. Flavia, yeah. Do you have questions to Anna and Giselle about informal economy in Brazil? Hello, Flavia.
You need to unmute.
Are you able to unmute your microphone?
Maybe she's experiencing some issues, right? Yeah.
She's writing.
Okay.
Maybe she can write. Maybe
Yes.
Flavia, you want to write your question?
If you want, you can also type your questions and we can read it together and answer by Dr. Anna and Giselle.
Let's see.
So maybe while we are waiting questions from Flavia, I also have one question. I take my power here as chair to also put questions to Dr. Anna. Actually, I'm interested when you discuss about the role of technology. There's also a bit of follow-up to the question from Adriana before to George. So how do you think this role of digital technology, whether it's smartphone or internet, in this time of pandemic, do you think it brings more inequality, or do you think it successfully trying to bridge the gap between workers?
So I wouldn't have objective data to answer that, but my impressions based on what we've been studying is that the apps, they don't change the inequality. They just they combine to the structure, to the previous structure of inequality, right? So they don't change that. They just stay there in a new context. Before it was without the technology. Now it is with the technology. This is the impression we get from the studies we have when we see how the workers from apps, the delivery people, they say, well, in the beginning, I would get a little bit more, and as the competition and the economy also fluctuates, my income is getting lower. And the income, of course, I'm saying income, but it's not actually an income, right? So my answer to that is, given what I've been studying with my students and my research team, we have the impression that it just keeps the same kind of structure. Doesn't change, yeah. There's one thing
Hi?
Hi.
No, I'm sorry. If you can finish.
Yeah, of course.
One point I think it's important to say, it's about how the gig economy is a consequence of continent of level to this kind of thinking about the autonomy of the worker. So this is put like a good thing to work, so you can work in every time and when you want, but it's not like that, because a major part of our people that I talk work in Brazil like 12 or 14 hours a day. So it's not so autonomy, it's more like precarious. And another thing, it's like how we can see uh, in our area, management and human resources, they put the autonomy to work is to put responsibility, and now if without power to decide this. So we think how to these people can receive more responsibility, but no more power to decide and information. So one thing in gig economy is really important, we think, is about asymmetry, information asymmetry, because the design of work it's put by the algorithm, but the work don't know everything about the work. So when can a rider can a consumer can be, or how much they will want in a month. So I think this asymmetry of information and the difference of power, as Anna said, about the asymmetry and the increased distance of power is the major important thing in this kind of economy, and they will increase the inequality.
Sure, very insightful. Thank you, Giselle, for sharing your views and also the research of yours here. So we have one people who raised hand, but we, due to the time constraint, I hope Muhammad, if it's okay with you, we will try to invite you to pop up your question later on our general discussion. So because we still have one more speaker who present from Indonesia. And then after that, we will have another question and answer session for the whole speaker. So if it's okay with you, we will have Muhammad and Ignacio. We will hold your question and will be put back later on our last session. Thank you, Muhammad. Okay, now let's continue to our third speaker, Dr. Amalinda, who will present also interesting presentations about informal workers and with the relation of gig economy and digital platform. And interestingly, she will present more on the female perspective here. Time is yours, Dr. Amalinda.
Thank you so much, Ioana. So I'll share my screen, but it come up a box, advanced sharing option. What does it mean? What should I click?
You mean maybe you choose all panelists?
So I'll check all panelists and everything, but
yes. But sorry, can I help? I think she's seeing many options to what file you're
okay.
So can you see it now?
Yes, perfectly. Okay. Yeah.
Let me just Thank you so much, Sustainable Intransition Study Group. It's really an honor for me to be here and also present my or work in progress about female drivers on motorcycle taxi in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Some of my point will be related to George's point, but perhaps with different names. It's very interesting how each discipline has their own term, which basically still quite similar. And also it will be highlight a bit what Dr. Anna already present earlier on the situations on workers' situation, particularly on the app-based workers. So this is again work in progress. Comments or input are very much welcome. I'm still thinking about expanding this small survey, small works during pandemic. I think all of you struggle with what you're doing at home. So this is what I did. And then, of course, it's getting exciting, but also confusing because so many interesting things to find. So I will start with my arguments, but perhaps just in case I will lose run of time, but particularly I see how I want to understand how pandemic impact to urban poor women living in the cities, and what to what extent it's gender inequality persistently there. And then this is just a very small works research that I conduct. So basically, pandemic has reinforced gender inequality in informal sectors. Perhaps it also happened in formal sectors that Dr. Anna already shared earlier, but my focus will be in this on-demand work or gig work, particularly on the Gojek driver, female Gojek driver. The second is something to do with technology. Many of the assumption or perhaps myths that technology can somehow eliminate very basic traditional values in our society. But in my case, or my small research, that doesn't show that's the case, because protracted patriarchal values is very much at place that make it really difficult for women, female driver working in the gig economy can really try to deal with it. And the third is I'm trying to connect or to reflect this research based on this very interesting notion on transitions that I think George already mentioned also earlier, and try to see how these informal sectors has a kind of transitions features in it, which I will show later. The way they can, what I call exit and entrance, enter and exit, easily within sectors, in the informal sectors, and then how this allow them to survive, basically. So that's that. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's just a very early, reflection. So this is my outline of presentations. I will basically the first two will explore very basic things about digital economy in Southeast Asia and Indonesia, and how the company that are the focus of this study, so-called Gojek, is a application-based company, already become a decacorn, which is basically already with investment more than 100 billion US dollars, big company. And then the notion I will going to also explore a bit on the women labor, female, using a bit perspective from the economic feminists, which are really explore what situation that women face in the labor market, and then what struggle they find, and what type of economic capitalists treat this labor. And the fourth is my findings, my main findings in this research, and I'll end with my reflection. So Indonesia is a very growing in terms of digital economy. As you see in Southeast Asia economy, internet economy market, Indonesia is leading compared to Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Right, so this is a very growing market in Southeast Asia, and particularly in the application-based economy. So this is just a very general pictures of the digital economy, which very wide. It can include also the app-based economy, digital startup, or a marketplace, and all so many things there. But this is just a very big picture on how situations Indonesia within the context of Southeast Asia economy. And particularly in Indonesia, if you happen to be in this country, you will see that no one who does not have mobile phone, because we have 79 million active user. Just for your information, the population is around 270 million population. The biggest economy in Southeast Asia. Consumer market for digital tech quite strong, 88.1 million. A home for startup, number one in Southeast Asia, and only Singapore, compared to Singapore, which only 1,800. Indonesia has more than 2,000 startup company, rapid growth of e-commerce, growing number of middle class. Even though, of course, the situation has already changed after the pandemic, but the very basic picture profile of Indonesia in relation to digital economy is what we see now. So, of course, digital economy will have digital labor, right? 60% of workers in Indonesia, around 70 million, are at the informal sector. This is the ILO data. But of course, it's very difficult to, one of the questions asked, how do we count this informal sector? That's really very difficult in Indonesian case, because it's really like under the horizon, right? They are there, but statistically speaking, it's really difficult to, because there's so many field too. There are street vendors, home-based business. They're under horizon in terms of there are no data and they don't get any tax, right? This is why the informal economy definition is very basic in the sense that all economic activities by workers and economic units that are the very key word here, in law or in practice not covered or insufficiently covered by formal arrangement, right? But this is a very wide definitions of informal economy, which basically a category that not this, not that, but what then, you know? So, but the notion of law, state intervention, also tax is not there. So maybe this is how the very basic definition of informal economy, which then make it us really careful to think to what extent this on-demand work can be lumped together into informal economy, because I think they are registered, right, by the application company, at least, you know, who are the driver, who are the partner, who are the whatever. So they are registered, but of course, in another way, they are not getting taxed or being taxed by the state, or they are not getting any benefit, social benefit from the state and all that. But I think we have a very quite confusing definition in relation to this gig economy, which seems to be, or feels to be in between. You know, it's not formal, but it's in a way registered. So this is really things that we can also discuss, and then how we can relate that with transition. So very quickly, these pictures are. I just took it from the internet. I don't have any luxury to go around and take pictures during this pandemic. But as I said before, Gojek is the biggest ride-hailing company in Southeast Asia with 40% market. It's founded in 2009, and in Indonesia itself, it has absorbed 2 million workers. Although the company has never released any official data on their what they call partner, because in a platform economy, they don't have workers. They don't call it workers because it really falls into the category of state and then with also law. So they call it partners. The total number is 2 million, which is 1.5 on total Indonesia working force. So this is quite big and also quite substantial. This is just the how do you say that, the drivers, including motorcycle drivers, but also there are partners, which, for instance, in the business of food delivery, the food owner shops also part of their partners. But what they are count here is just the drivers. Both are motorcycle and the car in the platform economy. So Gojek application has a very, how do you say that, specific service, which I show here. This is the all service that they have. And of course, during the pandemic, some of them already closed. For instance, there are Go Massage. So you can call somebody and then massage you at home. You can also go cleaning your house at home, and then you pay. And you can also go glam, basically like a makeover services. Most of these are female partners, right? So, but after the pandemic, this is all gone because of social distancing, hygienity, security, and all that. That's make it really this all since the pandemic in March. It's closed. So most of the female driver usually only go with this one, Go Right. We call it Go Right. This is the focus of my research. So before I move on, I just want to emphasize that how this technology type application-based services try to accommodate as many demand as possible, including what relate to women. In a way, it's good for women, urban poor women or whatever women wants to join this labor market or this market force, but at the same time, it's kind of essentializing, types of women, very much women things like cleaning, massaging, and makeover. But in the context of a discussion, this is good for women, urban poor, who can join the application and then can make some money from that. So as I said before, digital economy also relate with digital labor, and I think application-based economy, as Dr. Anna already mentioned, is part of the flexibility regime, right? Basically, it features three things. First, flexible, lean, and cost efficient, and what's so-called work 4.0, right? But even though it's flexible, as somebody has already said, it's very kind of a myth, right? It's assumed that you have flexibility, you have autonomy, you have this and that, but at the same time, it's actually very precarious. They work with the precarious working condition, low wage, few benefits, and no limited collective action, as well as little job security, right? So that's why very many critics on this platform economy as one of the solution for the poverty. This is why they get in and show no, that's not really the case, because they still work within a very limited working condition, right? So specifically, form of digital labor that are very popular, I'm sure also in Latin America, in Africa, in many other continents, gig work or on-demand work, crowd work, cloud work, right? So this is just a type of varieties of digital labor in the context of digital economy. Digital labor also present, many argue that because of the precarity, digital labor actually represent a regression to the times of the early industrial revolution, which basically argue how precarious the workers now in the context of work 4.0 or revolution 4.0 or whatever you call it, right? It really sounds very nice, but essentially it's really a kind of regression in terms of workers' rights, workers' social benefit and all that. So I think that's really related with the way we assume definition of classic capitalist definition, and I will particularly address on the women, female workers. The picture here is shows during the pandemic, the company kind of innovate to put the kind of borders between passengers and the driver, right? To just to avoid contagious or infection or whatever. But it's not everywhere. I think this is in Jakarta, in the city where I live. They don't have this, but they also have this check information. For instance, when you order a driver, they will info that this particular vehicle already clean, already being being cleaning, and there's no virus there, something like that. So they have this kind of standard operation procedures to really make sure that both the driver and both the passengers are healthy. So just very quickly, what we're talking about here in terms of business platform, right? So this is the very specific types of business model that combine, in one hand, demand from the consumer like us, for instance, to get a ride or food delivery or package delivery, and then the producers, basically the asset owners, right? Asset owners, basically us who wants to use our vehicle to operate within this system. But all of the risks are in the hand of the producer. The platform company only try to connect these two, but all the risks, all of the assets are belong to the producers, not the platform. The platform, of course, have workers which fall into the category of formal workers, but these are the producer, the workers, the partner or micro entrepreneurs are here with all the risks within the context of business model in the platform economy. Consumer, on the other hand, I think you all know the customer is king. They have a, how do you say that? They have this rating system. If they have extra money, they can give tip and everything. So basically, it's a connection between the two parties. So, and mostly on the service sectors. But in Indonesia also kind of developed. For instance, farmers and the producers and the customers, us. There's always the application called farmer, basically try to cut the whole distribution, inefficient distribution processes, and then get lower price and get the, how do you say that, both parties are happy. So in a way, it's a very efficient system, but at the same time, what people sometimes tend to forget is there are laborers here, including female laborers. So just to make sure that we are in the same understanding. So let me just quickly look at the kind of conceptual, or the way I try to understand this female motorcycle driver in the context of definition of works itself, right? Basically, capitalist economy separate or assume that women only have one role in their working place. They assume that, all of the problems at your home, your domestic works, is your business, nothing to do with our works, right? So that make it really difficult for explore or conceptualize that combine these two, because basically women has many roles. First, as a caretaker of family, which is called core care or productive economy. What George before mentioned, I think reproductive regime, right? So that's the first role. The second roles are many families, especially the urban poor. The wife also work as income earner, which is productive economy, right? I'm going to explore this later in this next slide. And the third is, it's a very kind of new understanding that women also a provider of emotional support, right? So you can imagine there are three types of roles that women play at the same times, but the way the notion of economy or work in the capitalist economy assume only one, which is the income earner, and kind of ignore the first and the third one, which make it really as if there is no responsibility from the state or from the market to really deal with it. So, and many already try to understand and conceptualize this, including Arlie Hoskill, that argue that what she called as second shift. It's like you are working in a factory, that's first shift and second shift, and women basically have that shift constantly all the time between home and work, the role of taking care of the family and the role of income earner. Whereas labor market that kind of isolate these two to each other and leave women struggle individually to cope with this, which I show in my survey or my research finding. Other scholars even go more by arguing that there are third shift, basically because they are also emotional provider for the family or basically for the member of the family, which means like these roles are getting more and more. And this is, I'm going to show my main top point in my presentation. So I conduct a research, kind of small survey to 99 respondents involved online, and then I plan to expand it, but still thinking possibilities, and adding with the in-depth interview through phone, right? So just give you a profile who they are. They are all female, born between 1980 and 2000, which is basically the very productive time. Age 65%. They are married with kids, having kids at school age. They are mostly living in Jakarta, the city where I live, and have worked with Gojek as a Gojek driver for 2 years, around 78%. Husband occupation, 35% are also Gojek driver. So basically, this work is their main work, not a kind of so-called flexibility that you can move around works. It's basically their main work, both working as a Gojek driver. 52% of the husband are seasonal labor and street vendor sellers, and 2.3 are our unemployment. So they are the breadwinner in the family. So this is just a bigger picture of my respondent. So they struggle, of course, during the COVID-19 because of the income fell sharply, including all the female drivers. Around 80% of the income drops. That's really the situation, the very hard situation. While they have having this income reduced or fell sharply, at the same time with the COVID pandemic, they have to taking care of the kids who are studying at home, right? Because school closed. So 85% of them have to reduce their working time to taking care of their children during school closes. I remember I asked, what happened? Do you get any help from your husband? Only one or two respondents say yes. So it's very, very low number or percentage of getting help from the partner, right? So in another way, most of the burden to taking care of kids are in the hand of women. Again, we come back to the definition of second shift, that the burden is basically on women. But interesting thing is, this is why I get to the patriarchy issues of values. When asked about why don't you ask your husband to swap place, and then you are working and the partner is staying home taking care of the kids, and one of them said no, because the domestic workers is women's affair or women's business. Husband cannot do it, right? So it's kind of a mix between, in one hand, they really struggling to coping with many things. On the other hand, the option of having partner to get involved is not also their option. So that's really why these values I think is quite important to understand the situations. So as I said, women struggle with the roles. And how do they struggle? So they kind of how do you say that, trying to find ways to to keep the income stable, which is not always. By selling food in front of house, being seasonal labor, for instance, to help the neighbor to do some agriculture work, or waking up early in the morning to help bringing some things to the market, small scale catering business. They do everything basically, because the thing is, drop of the income, but also increase of the domestic needs, right? Internet connection, purchasing phones for the kids, snack for the kids at home, and all that. So that's really the struggle is really real, and then the solution that they do is very individual, and they just find a thinking themselves, right? Other things is they try to do as a strategy is it's very interesting with come the technology issues. They officially one driver only have allowed to have one account, so they operate like my name is Linda and I have this Linda's account. But because of they are really difficult to find, so they bought another account. For instance, Joanna has one account and she's a Gojek driver. I bought her account. I used double account at the same time, so we call it jockey account using local language. So kind of a kind of struggle, but using making how do you say that, the application company, they try to make use, but even though they know it's illegal, it's not allowed, they will get sanctioned because of that, but there's no option. So they do these two types of technology account, but then it's very interesting because the company knows that this thing happens, so they try to disciplining the driver by asking randomly to do so-called face verification. So if, for instance, today I got an order to do my face verification to make sure I am the one who operate my account, I have to go to Gojek office and shows my, with the scanning and everything. That's really the problems, right? So, but they know how to deal with it. So they make sure that, bringing the owner, I bring Yuana with me, go to the Gojek office and verify her face, and that's it. So, but then you have to have a good relation with the people that you bought account from. So this is just a kind of strategies to juggle what in the pandemic, because of they have to do it themselves without any support from the other family members. Just a very quote from one of our from of my respondent. to show how this double shift is. I usually cook first before I leave home for work, usually in the dawn after the early prayer in Muslim society for our breakfast and lunch. I ask my husband, who is also a Gojek driver, to bring lunch so that he will not need to spend money for it. Since I live far from the city, I still need to leave early at 7, get home at 10. Sometimes it is almost midnight. I have to reach my target every day. Although I realize it means I have to work very, very hard. Even though in the context of uncertainty, she decided to just be on the street to get some orders. This case is quite unique because the kids already quite grown up, so she doesn't have to be constantly be with the family. But this is the situations with single parents. I usually work for 10 hours a day. After that, I switch off my account, go home and go to my children, chit chat with them and accompany them studying. I'm a single parent, so my kids needs me, so she will know my attention is full for her. I feel like this is a very kind of emotional also roles that she has to give to the kids, which again shows how the double roles among the female Gojek driver in Yogyakarta. So this is my last slide, the way I reflect this finding and also within this context of sustainability and nutrition. I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, informal sector is very flexible, and then it can provide enter and exit strategies within the sector itself. For instance, if you don't have any order, you can just make some business catering at home, or you can also have your food stall in front of your house. It's quite easy to move in within the sector itself. So I feel like this is a situation where you have this transition. It feels you have this kind of mobility in terms of options that you have in terms of in the context of this presentation is type of work, how you make money, right? So the 70% and under the horizon world is really, in a way, for female workers, is quite give them kind of freedom, right, to seek way to survive, basically. So that's my first reflection on this, right? This model in platform economy, though flexible, but it operates just like capitalist economy, with disregarding women burden and their roles, basically. So they don't really care under the pretext of you have freedom, you have this, situation that you can choose whenever you want to do whatever you want to do. But actually, essentially, if you already have that as your main job, that's really not the case, right? The same typical capitalist economy, which places individual decisions as main core, it's really how it works. There is no such regarding our sensitivity of being a woman and the double roles they have. Another thing that the last point that I'm quite amazed myself during this research is how resilience really matters among these women. Perhaps they don't have any option; they have to come out with something and seek to survival for the family. But it's really the situation, and I think this is really thanks to the informal sectors that allow them to to being flexible, to move around, to enter and to exit whenever they need. So I think that's really the situation, and then that's allow women to have this very strong resilience in dealing with the pandemic, in dealing with the hardship, in dealing with situation that unexpected during this COVID-19. So I think I have covered everything. I hope it makes sense, and we're looking forward for discussion and for more elaboration. Thank you so much, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Romalinda. I think, I think that's a very insightful and very detailed stories about how the livelihood of females motorbike drivers that you present. And it's not a question, but I'd like to maybe invite Professor Adriana to give like quick comments about Dr. Romalinda's presentation. If you have time to give to Adriana. So at the chat. Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Could you give like a quick comments about presentation, or if you have questions as well?
Oh yes, it was just a quick comment. I thought it was very interesting, And I think I totally agree with Professor Amalinda, and thank you for your great work, your great presentation. I think it's very insightful. And I think it's great that you are naming things correctly instead of gig, crowd, cloud, flexible, whatever work. Is it really a regression? We are going back to the times of the early industrial revolution, actually. So I totally agree with that. And I think we should, as researchers, start naming things correctly instead of just giving beautiful names to ugly things like flexible or gig or something else. I think it's just what it is. It's a exploration and a regression in terms of rights for workers. I think it just a quick comment.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. And now, as I promised, I would like to invite our two participants who has questions. First one is Ignacio, and then second one is Muhammad. So how we're going to do it? First, I would like to invite both of you, Ignacio and Muhammad, to pop your questions. And then after that, we will give some time to our panelists to answer the questions, okay? So now, do we still have Ignacio here?
No, I don't see him in the.
Okay, so maybe we could read again his questions and then we can answer it. So is it possible to measure quantitatively the impact of COVID on the informal economy? And then do we still have Muhammad here to pop his questions? Hi, Muhammad. Yes. Could you please tell us your questions? And you also have specific questions to Dr. Amal in the presentation as well. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, this is a very interesting study, and as a student of gig economy and all this transition phenomena, I've been deeply looking into it. So, what question I have for Dr. Amalinda is that in Pakistan recently, what we have seen that the Food Panda, one of the foodie gig business people, they offered something that the women who are working from home can offer home cooked food. Because of COVID-19, when many of the producers were not working, they had to close because of the COVID thing. So what they did that they bring on the people, the women who are cooking food at home. And that's how the platform played the role by bringing informal producers into the economic activity, which is informal and new to the economy in Pakistan. So how do you see this phenomena fitting into your research, where the producers are also linking to the gig economy and they are the gig workers because they are not regular producers? And similarly, the prosumers are also working like the people who are serving on bike and for delivery and things.
Okay, and Muhammad, I think you also have another questions. Do you still want to pop these questions, or is it's already answered by the text? Do you still want to ask these questions?
Yeah, my last question has been answered by Professor Anna. So this is the question for Professor Amalinda.
Okay, okay, thank you. So I give time. We have two questions. First one is quantitative measure to informal to the impact of COVID-19 to informal economy, and second we have specific questions to Dr. Amalinda. So I'll give the floor to the panelists who is ready to give the answer first.
Maybe I could go first on the quantitative measurements of impacts of COVID-19. Well, at the moment, I think it would be better to first of all, but this is just my thoughts. My first impression would be it would be good to first of all understand qualitatively exactly what is going on, because sometimes we might jump into developing indicators for something so that we can collect data quantitatively and then collect data that does not really touch the whole impact in a systemic way. Because, for instance, what we are getting from the concept of production, reproduction, and all that, you find there are quite a number of activities in these three regimes that you have to find typologies for, and all of them are disrupted differently. So if you are to pin in a number, then so that you can get a quantitative measurement, it might be a bit too complex for you to look at it overall as a system in terms of all the dimensions that come into it. So I think it would be good to use the COVID opportunity to actually understand how external shocks can really impact maybe a system or a place like an informal settlement before we now come to coining in numbers and say, for example, this is an indicator for A, B, C, D, and E.
Okay, thank you, George. And what do you think? Yeah, Dr. Anna.
I'd like to add, combine things that George brought and that Amalinda brought too. My point of view is we have a lot of difficulty in analyzing data from informality of work because it's organized, the system is prepared not to have data on informality of work. And it doesn't need to be like that. This is the question. When you think of the way that work is organized and the law of work in different countries, and of course I can talk more about Brazil, has evolved. It was looking at specific kinds of work based on companies in case of Brazil, in keeping up with the wealthy country, wealthy groups, right? And we think of informality. Informality doesn't need to be hidden or gray area. We could collect data as a system in the country and have data on those people. I can give two examples of things that happen in Brazil. One of them is the street workers, many times they are expelled by the police, right? So people think of people, they don't have work, they don't have jobs, they don't have any kind of opportunity, they don't have enough education because they didn't have the chance to get it. And then they try to sell things. They will just prepare masks and go to the streets to sell masks. And then the cops are going to say, you go out. So what's that, right? There is no kind of really investment in having those people registered. It doesn't need to be, it could not be the formal work, but at least some sort of registration, so we could keep track of the information and study. And from studies, from researching, have enough knowledge to prepare more effective public policies, right? And this is something that I think as we study more, and as at least in Brazil, I don't know how you could talk about Indonesia and Kenya, but in Brazil, what happens is most of our research is impacted and influenced by what is done outside in the North global, so many times to compare our research with what happens outside in the North, we need to study the formal organizations, and then we keep the informal outside. So the truth is, and I like a lot the Ignacio's question, is we don't have enough data because we don't have a system to collect that data in the country. And as researchers, we don't really give enough attention to that. And just bring a little bit of what Amalinda mentioned in one of her last slides was how face verification is being used to check if the person has more than one profile, more than one phone. So what you're talking about is the workers, the informal workers, the workers without opportunities, they are trying to find ways to survive. But now they're not only dealing with people with money, they are dealing with technology, and technology that is being prepared and more invested to kind of threaten the options that they might find, you know. So algorithms and face verification and a lot of technology, that how are they going to compete with that to make a living from that, right? So it's very for me it's very concerning, a lot concerning. And just one more thing, because George mentioned, I've been to Kenya, I've worked in Kenya for a month, George, I didn't mention that to you before. So when you mention about the illegal work, right? We didn't talk much about illegal work, and many things related to informal become illegal because of choice. Of course, it's very complicated, but it's not as simple to discuss informality if you don't consider politics, if you don't consider conflict of interest. It's a lot difficult. That's my comment.
Thank you, Dr. Anna. I think that's we could continue to Dr. Amalinda.
Yeah, I don't think Ignacio is still here, so I will just deal with Muhammad questions. Yeah, this is a typical platform economy that you mentioned in Pakistan. Very interesting Food Panda model of bringing together this supplier of farmers to be in to get to restaurants operated by perhaps small local home-based restaurant. But what I think can be interesting and relate to my research is the workers, the women, the workers, what type of roles or responsibility that they have, whether it's make them better empowered quote unquote, or at least survive during the pandemic. That will be fit with my research that I just share. All right. But I think it's getting more and more in Asia in general. I'm not sure about or perhaps in Latin America and also in Africa, global South. I mean, this option of application based technology as provide to many, absorb many labor. It's getting more and more popular because of the formal sector is really not too strong, right? So, but again, if you discuss more on the rights, particularly on women and their roles, essentially they are the same. They are not really sensitive to this where women with many roles and all that, and then the flexibility actually become a myth in a way to really secure women workers, right? So that can be really connected with the situation in Pakistan. I think that's my answer, Yuana.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Amalinda. And we have finished our webinar. I give big round of applause to all of our three speakers here. Thank you so much for sharing your interesting idea presentations and answering the questions in these discussions. So after this, there is one little announcement. We will have another webinar also from the STRN community. The topic is Geography of Transition, which will start in half an hour. So if you already registered and have the link to join, you can join the next webinar in half an hour. And I would like to appreciate all our speakers. Thank you so much for joining our webinars today. I'm sure that there is a lot of things that we could follow up and discuss further. And thank you for Dr. Anna, who already shared her contact in the chat. So maybe for those participants who want to have follow-up discussion, you can contact her and also her teams. And I think George and Dr. Amalinda, thank you so much. You also have shared your profile and contact. If the respondent, I'm sorry, if the participants wants to contact you, you can also contact Dr. Amalinda and George for further discussions. I think we have a very interesting and fruitful discussion about the informality today. I actually want to have further discussions that may be on our next webinar. And one last thing, we will have our final webinar of in 2020 next month on 2nd December. And that will be the topic of role of the state, and we have more general debate around that. So please wait for our information and through mailing lists and also from social media like Twitter for information about our next webinar. So thank you so much. Apologize for any mistake for me as an error for me as a chair today. And thank you, Bifasi and Rafael. If you have something to add, please. Bifasi or Rafael?
I think you did great. Thank you. You did
Okay.
great. Thank you, Ioana, for chairing this. And also, this also shows that you have volunteered to do this on behalf of the community. So that's really great. Really appreciate your enthusiasm for this.
My pleasure. Okay, thank you everyone. So see you on our next webinar. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.